So in today's video, I'm going to be discussing some secret details you might have missed in Resident Evil Death Island, and as of filming this, it's the 1-year anniversary. There's actually a lot of details regarding weapons this time around, which definitely went over my head, so let me know down in the comments if you got all of these or if you missed some. But anyways, let's get started. So number 1. The handgun that Leon uses throughout the movie that can be first seen at the start with the bike chase is actually called the Sentinel-9, or in reality, the weapon is a custom 6-hour P226 beaver tail. This weapon has a ton of interesting history, which many fans will recognize more recently as the same DLC weapon that can be purchased in Resident Evil 4 Remake. Now, there's actually a lot more to this weapon. For starters, this is a weapon that's used exclusively by DSO members. DSO stands for Division of Security Operations and is the same agency that Leon works for. On top of this, Leon was the one that spearheaded the project to develop this weapon, but the initial idea first came from the FBC, or the Federal Bioterrorism Commission, which was the organization that can be seen in the game Resident Evil Revelations during the Terra Grigia incident. It was actually a prototype weapon that stayed in the hands of DSO for years, though as mentioned later on, Leon ended up taking over the project and was supposed to use the Sentinel-9 in 2013, but this of course got delayed thanks to the Tall Oaks bioterror incident in 2013 during the events of Resident Evil 6. So production of the weapon didn't happen until after the events of Resident Evil 6. So having the weapon be a DLC in Resident Evil 4 Remake is more of a callback to the previous movie, since Resident Evil 4 technically takes place in 2004, which funny enough is 10 years before the weapon was actually put into production, which can be seen in the movie that also takes place in 2014, Resident Evil Vendetta. By the way, the Sentinel-9 handgun is actually my favorite weapon in Resident Evil 4 Remake. Number 2, at the start of the movie, it's explained why the movie takes place in San Francisco. This was definitely a detail that I missed when I first watched the movie, but this scene can actually be found at the start, specifically in the truck scene when Dylan asks his friend JJ, "Why do you think they made us gear up like this?" Dylan's friend JJ explains, "Whatever it is, it's serious enough to call us off-duty guys in. Shit, Dylan, we could be in San Fran right now eating crab and drinking beer." Dylan responds, "Frisco isn't going anywhere anytime soon, JJ," which confirms why the movie is set in San Francisco. Since Dylan's always reliving that nightmare slash memory after going through the trauma of the Raccoon City incident, it makes sense why he probably thought that the location of where he would enact his global destroying plan would be in San Francisco. Number 3, during the opening credits when Jill appears, they show something very interesting. You can see a picture of Jill in the Spencer Mansion, but what's interesting is that the Spencer Mansion looks identical to the one seen in Resident Evil 1 Remake, yet Jill is wearing her Resident Evil 3 Remake Stars outfit. So that just begs the question, are we getting closer to a Resident Evil 1 Remake? And if so, are they going to use the same design that was used in the first remake? Number 4, another detail that's very suspicious can also be found in the opening credits, especially with Chris's section. It actually shows Vendetta / Death Island Chris Redfield, but what's interesting is that he's wearing his outfit from Resident Evil Revelations. So Capcom technically made the new Chris model wear the previous outfit. I'm definitely hoping that Capcom remakes the Revelation games once they've remade all of the other important games, of course, since the ports weren't that good going from 3DS to console / PC in my opinion. Number 5, just in case you missed my previous videos and shorts discussing this, but when you see Rebecca grab a coffee, you can see that this is the same type of coffee she likes in Resident Evil Vendetta. More specifically, a caramel macchiato with extra chocolate chips and extra whipped cream on top. Number 6, in the shooting range when Jill discusses the events of Resident Evil 5, she says something that's a major change to the original Resident Evil 5 story. Jill specifically states that when I was being mind controlled by Wesker, all I wanted to was to kill you. All of you. I was conscious. I couldn't stop myself. It was like living in a nightmare. This is completely opposite of what Jill states in the OG Resident Evil 5 story, where in that one, she states,
"I couldn't control my actions, but God, I was still aware. Oh, forgive me."
It's all right.
Thank you.
So this new retcon gives us a huge hint to changes we could potentially see in a future Resident Evil 5 remake. Number 7, Rebecca explains in the movie that the virus that Dylan uses is a modified version of the T-virus. The variation of this version can definitely be seen in the fact that the zombies are way more agile compared to the zombies found in the Mansion incident and Raccoon City incident. There's several scenes in the movie where we can see zombies climbing, jumping further distances, so even though the movie doesn't explicitly tell us the modifications done to the T-virus, it's nice to see that they did put some of these hidden details details in the way the zombies move. Number 8. The gun that Chris Redfield uses in the movie is none other than the Albert W. Model 01, which first made an appearance in Resident Evil 7 and was later a purchasable weapon from the merchant, aka the Duke, in Resident Evil Village. The interesting thing is that this weapon prototype was originally designed by Albert Wesker, and the prototype's name for the weapon was named Albert.W.Model 01P. The P at the end of the name stands for performance, which isn't surprising coming from Wesker, since one of his famous lines in OG RE5 is poor performance indeed. Though it is worth mentioning that the reason Chris uses this weapon designed by Albert Wesker is due to Blue Umbrella making the prototype, much in the same way that Leon got his hands on the Sentinel-9 project, as mentioned earlier. This detail was first told to me by a viewer in one of my trailer breakdowns, so a huge shout out to him for noticing the secret detail all the way back when the trailer first dropped, which ultimately led me to confirm this detail, which, not to mention, I think it's hilarious that Chris uses a weapon that was designed by Albert Wesker. Now, we actually have a lot more secrets to go over, but if you guys want me to make more secret detail videos, then let me know by leaving a like. You know, these videos actually take a lot more time, a lot more editing, and a lot more research compared to my other content. So as mentioned, if you guys want me to make more of this content, make sure to leave a like and also support the channel by subscribing. But anyways, let's get back to the video. Number 9. When Leon meets Jill and gives her a gun in the underground section of Alcatraz, it's cool to see that Leon passes the weapon by doing a gun twirl / spin before handing Jill his extra handgun. The secret detail here is that this is clearly a callback to Resident Evil 6's Leon, since every time you reload in that game while using both weapons, aka the wing shooters, Leon twirls his handguns as well. This is also funny since Matthew Mercer, the voice actor for Leon in Resident Evil Death Island, also voiced him back in Resident Evil 6, and he's actually my favorite Leon. Number 10. Funny detail regarding Leon that goes back to Spain in Resident Evil 4 is the fact that the model for Leon in Resident Evil Infinite Darkness and Resident Evil Death Island is actually based on the actor and singer named Yu Shirota. What's funny is that Shirota is both Spanish and Japanese. Personally, I think it's hilarious that Leon still has a Spain connection. Number 11. At the start of the movie, specifically in the Raccoon City flashback, something very interesting happens that isn't really seen in other games. There's an instance of where someone gets past the barricade on the outskirts of Raccoon City. This is explained to be an Umbrella executive, but I'm curious to know who this person might be. Since it's mentioned that it's an executive, it obviously must be someone important. This is also confirmed in the truck when the Umbrella superior gives the team a briefing. He explains, orders are to assist evacuation of Umbrella Corp execs and government officials only. No civilians, repeat, no civilians. Regardless, this is a very small detail, but I was just super curious to know who this could be, and the potential of explaining members that escaped Raccoon City could potentially come up in a file in a possible Resident Evil Code Veronica remake, since that game starts in Umbrella Paris facility. It's possible that some Umbrella execs that worked in Raccoon City and escaped could have fled and been transferred to that facility, but make sure to watch my Umbrella facility theory after this video if you missed that one. Number 12. The weapon that Dylan uses is a Colt Python with a stainless steel finish, which is a callback to Resident Evil 1, since that's the weapon that Barry uses, though we've had this weapon appear in several Resident Evil games, for example, Resident Evil Code Veronica. Number 13, we also see that Claire uses a weapon called the CZ-75 Shadow 2. The weird thing about this gun's appearance in the movie is that the weapon wasn't even made in 2015, which is the year that the movie takes place in. It actually released in 2016, so it's just clearly an oversight and a funny detail to note, but I'm curious if this is going to be Claire's weapon in future games. Resident Evil 9, anyone? Number 14, near the end of the movie when Chris grabs the huge RPG looking gun, this is the M202 Flash. This again is another Resident Evil 1 reference, since this is the same weapon used to defeat Tyrant in Resident Evil 1 and the remake near the finale of the game. What's more interesting is that when Chris uses this weapon, it only poses a minor nuisance to the infected Dylan, which also just goes to show how powerful Dylan's transformation really is. Number 15, another weapon that makes a return to the movie is the W870, or in reality, the Remington Model 870, which has made an appearance in multiple games in the series, most recently in RE2, RE3, and RE4 remake, and even Resident Evil Village. So it's no surprise that this gun makes a comeback in this movie. You can actually see Jill use this weapon in the hangar near the end of the film. Number 16, in the same scene where Jill uses has the 870 shotgun, we also see Chris using the M60 machine gun, which was famously used by John Rambo. But this is the first time we see this weapon being used in Resident Evil, not counting the Mila Jovovich movie, since it was shown in the second Paul W.S. Anderson movie, Resident Evil Apocalypse. Number 17, in that same finale scene, we also get a glimpse at a new two-man weapon / rocket launcher that Leon and Chris use to kind of shoot at the gate. Now, this prototype schematic for this weapon can actually be seen at the start of the movie in the intro sequence. It's very quick. Number 18, in the same final scene, there's also a moment where Leon hangs with one hand. This is a pretty funny detail to add to the movie since Leon has actually done this on multiple occasions. The guy always seems to find a way to hang from stuff. Leon, for the love of God, stop showcasing your upper body strength. Number 19, during the beginning of the movie, when we see Jill enter the household, you can see Jill using the same technique with her flashlight as we saw in Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. More specifically, we see Shenmei use this technique. So I wonder if DSO training shares similarities with BSAA training, or is this just an oversight that the director just wanted to add? Number 20, at the start of the movie, when we see Claire on the beach of San Francisco with the dead killer whales, this scene is very reminiscent of the scene that's shown in Resident Evil Revelations when Jill and Parker are in Italy searching BOWs that wash ashore from the Terra Grigia. So it seems we got another callback to Resident Evil Revelations. Come on, Capcom. Number 21, near the end of the movie when Rebecca enters the vicinity of Alcatraz, both Rebecca and her team get attacked by a huge BOW fish monster. This scene is very reminiscent to the original novel written by S.D. Perry that isn't canon to Resident Evil. The book is called The Caliban Cove, and in that story, Rebecca and the Stars infiltrate a secret Umbrella lab in Maine. While approaching the cove with their boat, they also get attacked by a huge BOW shark monster that's also been infected with the T-virus. So it's interesting that this scene was included in the movie. As mentioned, Caliban Cove isn't part of the Resident Evil story officially, so it's cool to see some ideas bleed over to newer titles. By the way, if you haven't read that novel, I highly recommend it. Number 22, near the end of the movie when all the cast gets ready to fight the infected Dylan, you can actually see Chris reload his weapon and then check the barrel with one hand. What's interesting about this detail is that it's clearly taken from John Wick 2, who made it popular. But what's strange is that we've never seen Chris do this reload technique. We've only seen Leon do this while also using the car system center access relock technique recently in Resident Evil 4 Remake. So it definitely seems like there's a John Wick fan that's working at Capcom. Number 23, during the final scene where we see several characters like Jill run a lot, I was actually really curious to see how the director was able to accomplish this, since the problem with this is that most mocap studios aren't that big. But sure enough, in BTS of the movie, we see that director Eiichiro Hasumi use treadmills for this scene, which is why the characters look natural when running for long distances in certain shots. Honorable mentions. All right, this section I'm going to dedicate to more well-known or obvious details. I'm catering to more newer fans for this section that might not have played previous games, since longtime fans probably noticed these. Prior to the movie's release, it was sort of explained as to why Jill looks exactly like she did back in 1998. Now, the explanation that we actually got was from the Resident Evil Portal official Twitter account that basically stated Jill Valentine fought against bioterrorist attacks in Stars alongside Chris, and her T-virus infection has slowed her aging but left some psychological scars. She rejoins the team after rehabilitation. So this was basically the explanation as to why she's still young. It's basically alluding to the fact that her T-virus infection that she received back in Raccoon City is the reason, but the fact that they also mention the psychological scars that the T-virus left on her doesn't really make much sense, since, you know, as a longtime Resident Evil fans will know, the reason she's had so much psychological scars, and, you know, she even brings this up in the movie if you've watched the movie, is due to the fact that Wesker did several experiments on her in the time frame of 2006 all the way to 2009. Obviously, we don't know the specifics as to when Wesker's experiments officially stopped and he basically had her as a puppet, but the thing that I need to stress here is that Capcom's explanation for why Jill now has slow aging doesn't make much sense. It almost seems like it's almost like it's due to her being infected back in RE3, and then also because she went through all of the Wesker experiments. Not to mention, a lot of fans were kind of confused since it was canon in RE5 that Jill's hair color was officially blonde. So it doesn't really make much sense as to why her hair just naturally went back. A lot of fans actually speculated that the reason for this is due to the fact that Jill just dyed her hair, or, that was a good theory, but as mentioned, we're kind of still left in the dark through all of this. So if Jill does appear in the next Resident Evil game, is she going to have blonde hair, hair, or is she gonna look exactly like her RE3 look? There's no denying that. I think every Resident Evil fan is still pretty confused about that. Another well-known detail is that Dylan is actually voiced by Damon Mills and is known for portraying the new Frieza in Dragon Ball Super. From the movie, we know that this is Jill's first time returning to duty after the events of Resident Evil 5. It's worth noting that Resident Evil 5 specifically took place in 2009, and this movie is set in 2015. So it's been technically 6 years. What's even more interesting is that the movie showcases Jill overcoming trauma that occurred in 2006 all the way to 2009, where she was essentially kidnapped and used as a puppet for experiments by Albert Wesker. This movie is a comeback for Jill while also explaining her absence in other major events like Resident Evil 6 and Resident Evil Vendetta. During production of Resident Evil Death Island, it was actually called Vendetta 2. The reason we know this is because Capcom actually had the copyright for that name as a placeholder. The plasma rifle that Jill uses near the end of the movie is clearly a callback to Resident Evil 3 Remake, though of course this is a lot more portable than the one scene in Resident Evil 3 Remake, which of course takes place in 1998. What's funny about this scene in particular is that when the mocap actor for Jill uses the plasma rifle, to make the weapon feel more heavy, they had a crew member pull the gun down as she was pulling it up to make the gun seem more heavy on camera. During the gun range scene, you can clearly see Jill using her samurai edge, though it's worth noting that Jill first acquired her first samurai edge back in the 90s, which was a custom-made 92F Beretta that was made by Robert Kendo, the gun shop owner from Kendo's gun shop in Raccoon City that can be seen in Resident Evil 2 Remake as well as Resident Evil 3 Remake. You can see Jill and the other STARS members use the samurai edge in RE1 Remake, but it's worth noting that this samurai edge scene in the movie is a different version from the one seen in RE1 Remake. This version of the samurai edge was made by the BSAA and it's called the Samurai Edge A1 and was custom modeled after the Beretta M9A1. Sure enough, Jill acquired this weapon right before the events of the Queen Zenobia, aka the events that transpire in Resident Evil Revelations. Now, if you guys don't know what Besanta means in Resident Evil 4 Remake, then make sure to click this secret detail video right here where I give a full explanation. But anyways, thank you so much for watching.